I didn't feel or wasn't confronted by people reacting to my race or being racist. Like when I went into small towns to go shopping or go to the Walmart or whatever it was, neutral. I don't know, being Indian is like an interesting position because you almost get treated like, the model minority. I'm not seen as a threat.
This is United States of Race, personal stories of how our earliest memories determine a lifetime of relationships. I'm your host, DB Crema. When did you become race aware?
My notion of being different, of being an other, I first noticed that when I moved to Australia when I was 9.5 or 10, because for the first time I was surrounded by people who really looked different from me. It took me a while to adjust to the notion that I was in this other bucket. I wasn't part of the default setting. And I think the first time I realized that was, or felt like that was a bad thing, I was in like 4th grade, 5th grade, and we got paired up with like kindergarten kids or 1st graders as buddies or mentors. And I was like, okay, well, sure, I'll do it. I was very academically inclined, like really wanted to help, very bossy. And this little girl, we talked to each other. We talked to each other or whatever. And one day she just got upset with me about something. And she said, get away from me. And I was like, what? She said, get away from me. You smell like curry.
Wow.
And it was the first time that I'd ever heard anything like that. And I didn't understand. I was so confused. And I think I talked to me. I was like, why would she say that? Do I smell? And that was sort of my introduction to, it's not just that I look different or that people think I have elephants in my backyard in Bombay. It's like, no, it goes deeper than that.
What was that about?
So when I moved to Sydney, the children I met there, friends, were very curious about what my life was like. Asked me about elephants and cows and like, was I near a jungle? Just these very exotic ideas. When I went back to Mumbai, my friends there wanted to know about kangaroos and, did I live in the bush and what was my life like? Like there were there's these very obviously like entertaining childish notions of what life in a different country was like. And I'm just always delighted by that.
It's this romanticized view, probably from watching Saturday morning cartoons.
Yeah. It's interesting because I think as a child, that sort of, it makes sense, right? Your world is small, somebody else's experience or existence or whatever, even if they don't understand it or can't. It's always this kind of this amazing moment when kids realize like, oh, your life is totally different from mine. Like, tell me more. It's not this automatic fear. And I think as adults, when you realize that somebody else's life is so different or somebody else's existence is so different, the instinct can be denial, right? To say, I don't think that can be true. We tend to deny other people's experiences when we can't understand them versus being curious about them.
And what was it like when you came to the US? You came as an adult and that was a completely different culture.
Yeah, it felt very familiar. Like when I came out of the airport in Boston and heard the accents and everything, growing up on like American TV and movies and all of that, I felt immediately like I knew where I was. So I was born in the US. My parents were here as grad students from India. And my parents moved back to India when I was 2, they wanted to go back to India when I was 2, they wanted to go back and help, fix the country, like make a difference at home. And I moved to the States in 2010 for business school. So it didn't feel that jarring, actually, for me. I think those moments of like shock or surprise present for me at business school when it was like our class split really along racial lines in terms of like social interaction. And it was considered totally normal. And I don't think it was, conscious, but it was clearly visible. Everyone knew it was happening. And the Indians would, hang out with each other, like the Black kids would hang out with each other, the, white East Coast people that all went to the same schools would hang out with each other. And of course there were, there was mixing and there were people that, floated between groups. But when I noticed it was in my second year off campus, I had 2 roommates. One was a Black woman from Memphis and another was a white woman originally from upstate New York. And like I was friends with both of them. And so we kind of got together and said, hey, we're going to live in a house together. And for the rest of the year, people constantly forgot that we were in the same house. Every time. We'd already known everybody else in the class for like 1 year at that point. People always assumed that I lived or, was part of like some Indian house somewhere and And more often than not, also always assumed that our Black roommate lived in this house with like four other Black women. They just like lumped her in with that group. And so every time I was like, oh yeah, I know, we'll come together because we live together. They'd be like, oh, right. Oh, I thought she lived in the other house. Oh, I thought you lived here. And it's things where like it seems very innocuous, but over and over again, it just kind of reinforced this notion that, oh, we're not supposed to, according to whatever unwritten rules exist, we're not supposed to mingle. Or like her place is defined by everybody else already. And that drove me up the wall. And I think the more like I think I asked questions, why do people react this way? Like what is that? I was very naive about it. The more I realized that like the lived experience of my Black classmates was completely different from mine. So it was weird. I sort of came to this awareness that a place on surface, or most of the time, could be appropriate, inclusive, and then have these like pockets of racism that were almost more insidious because no one had an issue with it. Like I can feel like the anger like coming up 10 years later.
It's like the housing version of all Black people look alike or all Indians look alike. To your point, it's or all Indians look alike. To your point, it's people just have like they deny the experience of others if they haven't experienced it themselves.
Yes, like I think empathy has limits, and I may not be able to empathize with someone else's experience, but also that shouldn't stop me from acknowledging that experience as real and valid. Like I think I had this notion that I had to be able to walk in that person's shoes to then engage and understand. But why isn't it enough for someone to tell me what happened or what their experience is like and for me to just believe them? Why do I have to be able to understand it or like, feel like, oh, I'm there with you? Why can't I just say, okay, that happened and that's real? It's important for us to get away from this notion that like, oh, you have to be able to, put yourself in somebody else's shoes to be an ally or to be a friend. You don't. You should just be able to believe people as well.
Isn't that the definition of sympathy?
Yeah, I guess.
I think the challenge comes up when in the act of acknowledging other people's is it requires of them to turn the mirror on themselves. And I think that's when it becomes uncomfortable and it's easier to ignore and deny than to recognize it.
Yeah. I think that's really well said. And it's a really, really strong point because it's also like it's always easier to point to other people in your demographic or say it's it's the other Indian people that are racist. Anti-Blackness exists in the community, but with other Indians, I'm not part of the problem. And that can't be true. Other people like me are like this, but I'm not. I mean, everyone wants to believe that they're not part of the out of the average, but yeah, confronting our own part in that is I think really important. For me, like coming to the US, not knowing a lot about American history, not understanding systemic racism, it made it so that like when people don't talk about systemic racism, it's like, oh, this is just the way things are acceptable, to believing that this is how things are. Like this is just normal. And like that denial and that normalization is really, really powerful. Like, the first election I voted in the US was President Obama's reelection. And so my memory of that was like, oh yeah, like what a progressive country. Like this is amazing. And so when people said, yeah, we live in a post-racial society, I was like, yeah, must be true. Which now, now I'm like, what? It's embarrassing to think about it, but also like I can't judge myself constantly because then I can't move forward. But like the dominant messages in the media or whatever it is like, yeah, we're past all that. And until that gets questioned loudly and widely and in every forum, people will believe it.
It's interesting to hear you talk about it from a foreign perspective of being socialized to believe that this is how things are and there's very little reason to question it.
Yeah, like my questioning was very focused on me and my race, my ethnicity here. Like I bristled, and I still do, when people ask me, oh, you work at Microsoft, because I live in Seattle and whatever. I'm like, what? Like that not all Indians are engineers, right? Like that, right? Like that, right? And Uber drivers who will very sweetly say, oh, but you don't sound Indian. I really like your accent. And I'm like, there are like 26 official languages in India and then so many more. And just because no. And some of them would be like, oh, no, no, why are you getting so angry? This is ridiculous. So I have that consciousness under my own behalf, right?
Well, are we getting to the point where we are so overly sensitive about every little thing that everyone said? Should we be aiming to get to a point in our society where nobody ever says anything politically incorrect?
I think we will never get to that place. But I think that aiming for a society where everyone feels respected is a really, really wonderful goal to have. I think there's a difference between like political correctness and I think striving for shared, equal, mutual respect. Like, is it okay for a taxi driver, Uber driver to make a joke like that? And I don't blame him for doing it. But at the end of the day, I'm counting on him as like someone in my society to our collective good. And so is he. He wants, he needs his fellow citizens to be behind like what's important for him. And if he doesn't have, if he or many other people think it's okay to make comments about, that put me in a box, that's not a good thing for our society. So it's not political incorrectness. I think it's more, is it a symptom of underlying attitudes? Like, what is it signaling actually?
Right.
So, yeah, I find that in my experience, I think the people, when I've talked to them about who are most worried about, political correctness or like, oh, why can't I make this joke? Like, why can't I make this joke? Like, why don't you relax? It's just a joke. Those people have not been the people who are the target of the joke or the punchline. It's been white male friends who are like, wait, but why can't we just laugh about this? Or white female friends who have been making jokes about colonialism, like white husband and me. There was a period of time where people were making jokes about the Raj and how, oh yeah, like his people colonized Indonesia, which they didn't, but he has a Dutch last name. So, it was convenient for the joke. And ha ha ha, now he's like married this Indian woman. And that shit made me really mad.
What we need is the perfect sentence that perfectly sums up why it's an issue. Because if you
Yeah.
tackled that every single time and try to get people to understand why, in that case, it's not funny, it's not something we laugh about, you can't go through your day explaining that to everybody and get anything else done. So it's like,
Oh, actually, I think I read this somewhere recently. I think that she was saying I asked them to explain why that's funny. She was like, when people say things, that I don't find amusing or offensive, I don't laugh because I think a lot of us also our instinct is to laugh, right, to diffuse the tension. She doesn't laugh, and then she says, "Why is that funny?" And she said that makes people so uncomfortable. Like immediately, it makes them accountable, right? Like, well, can you tell me why that's funny? So I haven't used that yet, but I might. Although I will say, I think once I started speaking up in my friend circle when things made me uncomfortable, um, my friends responded really well. They're still funny, but they're not funny at my expense.
hmm,
At least not, sorry, not at my demographic, like not at the expense of like things I can't control about myself. Like they can still make fun of me for being sloppy
you.
or not being able to cook or all of those things. Like all of that, like, yeah, there's plenty of material without having to talk about, my gender or my racial makeup.
Make fun of me. Don't make fun of everything I represent.
Yes.
Don't make fun of everything I represent.
Yes. Yeah.
So how do we get to that post-racial place?
Yeah. Make America post-racial again?
Make America post-racial again.
Yeah, I don't know if we do you think we can get to a place where we're ever post-racial?
Mankind.
Yeah. What's been giving me, I think, a lot of hope and like almost excitement for the future is like looking at how different already like Gen Z is in terms of engagement and not all of them obviously, but they seem far more willing to fight for equality and for equal treatment. My take on it is I think with every successive generation we have a chance to do better. As like the Black Lives Matter movement has gotten more press and more coverage globally. In India, the Dalits who are, who in the old time touchables, like within the caste system, like really, they've still been they're on the receiving end of so much violence in all its forms. And it's been, again, normalized and denied because, oh, we abolished caste in like the 50s. Like caste doesn't exist anymore. It's like, no, it does. Just because you say that it's not there doesn't mean it's not there, doesn't mean it's not there. Like everyone behaves like it's a real thing. So the Black Lives Matter movement has raised consciousness around the Dalit movement in India. That's amazing to see. The energy and the force of activists can magnify like that globally and at a pace that's even faster than I think it was before. It gives me hope. Like, yes, there will always be things that, need to be fought or addressed. There's always going to be another dimension along which we can be divided and split. But this shows that we can be united across these things that divide us.
Thanks for listening to United States of Race. This podcast was written and produced by me, DB Crema. Thank you to Alley Creative for designing our artwork and to Nick D and Nick S for technical support. If you love great storytelling, please subscribe to United States of Race on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, or wherever you get your podcasts. You show us some love by rating and writing a review on Apple Podcasts or Podchaser. And go ahead and share this podcast with your friends and anyone who believes in the power of building connection through sharing personal stories. You can also follow us on Instagram at, all one word, United States of Race. And as always, if you, yes, you, have a compelling story to share and would like to be featured in an upcoming episode, send us a message at unitedstatesofrace@gmail.com. That's all one word, unitedstatesofrace@gmail.com. Until next time.